my friend and brother put me in the back of a taxi and something happened. A fight broke out outside the cab. I got out and it's really all that I remember of that night. I mean, my memory's pretty hazy up to that point, but it goes black after that.
Usually when I start a podcast on my beloved Dirty Linen, I'm feeling kind of interested and excited and curious. I think today I would also add to that feeling nervous, which is, a little bit of a new feeling for me when I'm having these cozy chats. My guest today is Dominic Walker, and I suppose I'll just start by saying how I came upon Dom. It was just doing a little bit of Instagram rabbit holing. I came upon a discussion that was being planned around agroecology, and I thought, Dom could be a great person to have on the producers because he's a farmer at Y Farm in Victoria. But when I had a little pre-chat with Dom and I asked him if there was anything that I might perhaps need to know before we scheduled our chat, he said, well, yes, actually there is. There's a big thing that that Dom did that's happened in his life that made me want to move this conversation from the producers to Dirty Linen, because I feel like we need to have a bit of a big conversation. So Dom, a bit of a long intro, but welcome to Dirty Linen.
Hi, Dani. Thanks for having me.
So I know that, in your background, you've got a agriculture degree from Melbourne Uni, you've got a master's in food systems from New York, and you're really interested in agroecology. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and these interests of yours?
Sure, thanks. Yeah. I think my studies in food really kicked off my kind of intense interest in agriculture and the food system. Back in 2015, I was kind of bumbling through life as finishing my bachelor's degree in arts and not really knowing what to do with myself or what to make of the world. And I was making pickles of all things, organic ferments, sauerkrauts and kimchis with a friend of mine. And that, I suppose, led me down a bit of a rabbit hole into the food we eat, where it comes from, what it does for our health, and what the implications of that agriculture are for the planet. That, I suppose, kicked off what's now a lifelong journey into agriculture, and more recently into what you've described as agroecology, which for me sort of formed, I suppose, or maybe synthesized all the different ideas that I had in my head about food and farming and I suppose social justice and community building. And when I started reading about agroecology, it was like a bit of an aha moment, I suppose, that feeling of, yes, this makes sense. This finally puts some words to what were otherwise pretty disparate or conflicting ideas about agriculture and farming and the environment. So I suppose what was really attractive or interesting for me about agroecology was really that it's not just about farming or growing food in harmony with nature. It's also about human dignity and about a broader idea of equity and social justice and how we can work together to build a food system that serves everyone.
So I just don't know how to have this conversation. That sounds so noble and dignified and good, but then there is this huge thing that you did that I guess is not aligned with those principles. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I think I'll just dive straight in. I'm not sure how else to do it, but for me, my life changed drastically overnight in 2018 when I made a catastrophic mistake. I got in a fight and I put another man's life at risk, and I ultimately spent 12 months in prison as a result of that. In 2018, I was living and working in Guatemala City. It was my first kind of big adult job out of uni, out of studies. And it was a real adventure. And I was working for a coffee company, delivering trainings on climate change resilience to coffee farming families in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. It was just, a fantastic job and fantastic opportunity. And I really loved the work. But on a personal level, I just wasn't coping. I was, I think, deeply lonely and suffering from anxiety and depression and self-medicating with alcohol, drinking heavily, incredibly heavily, and abusing prescription anxiety medication. And when my contract was up in that gig, I suppose I kind of thought to myself, I think I need to get home. I need some help. I'm not doing so good. And so I traveled home. I made the choice to pack everything up and move back to Melbourne. And I flew home, and on the day that I got back, for some reason that I think I'll probably never understand, my brother and I decided that it was a good idea to go to the football. Not to stay home and have dinner with the family that I was ostensibly coming home to see, but to go out and get very drunk at the footy. And so we did. We went and proceeded to drink heavily and throughout the game and then after. And we ultimately got kicked out of the footy sometime after midnight. I was pretty incoherent at that point and falling all over the place. And my friend and brother went to basically get me home, put me in a taxi, go home, and I think they were going to continue on. But they put me in the back of the taxi and something happened. A fight broke out outside the cab. I got out, and that's really all that I remember of that night. I mean, my memory's pretty hazy up to that point, but it goes black after that. And I woke up the next day in this kind of state of perplexity with a deep sense that something bad had happened, that I wasn't quite sure what, but it wasn't good. And I looked at my phone and there was a message, and a friend had sent me a video and it said something like, "Is this you?" I clicked on a link and watched the video and immediately thought, no, that's not me, that can't be. And then this kind of sick realization that it was. And it's a video of me carrying out a very violent assault. And it's something that I think anyone who watches will have, including myself, a kind of visceral, physical reaction to. It's horrifying to this day. And yeah, my brother and I suppose really spent that day in a complete spin, just not knowing what to do, who to tell, who to talk to. And that problem was solved for us when the police rocked up at our family home that evening, and we were both arrested and taken to Melbourne police station and both charged. And that night in those police cells is what, I would describe as rock bottom. Not knowing what had happened to that other man, if he was okay, if he was okay. And of course, what would happen to us. We got released that evening. He'd been released. The man who I'd assaulted was released from hospital, and then we got bail, and then long legal process began. And about 12 months later, I pled guilty to 2 charges of assault and was sentenced to a year in prison. I was released in 2020 and I've just been piecing things together since then. And as you say, kind of navigating life after.
Dom, it's so intense. And I mean, when you told me, you're like, well, yeah, there is something you need to know. And you gave me, this sketched out the details of what had happened. And I did recall it from the news, but I hadn't ever watched the video. I went back and watched it. And as you say, it's horrific. It's sickening. And when you see, I mean, the Herald Sun just persisting calling you footy thug, it's a pretty easy description. I mean, how do you move forward with this? How do you reconcile this act with the person that you want to be?
It's a really good question, and forgive me if my answer's sort of long and potentially non-linear, because I think my experience of trying to reconcile it hasn't been linear. It's been a cyclical process of trying to find acceptance, but I think, like any kind of major shock or life event, there's this, I suppose I best describe it as a cycle of all those other kind of maelstrom of feelings that come with it, of denial, of shame, of anger, before you can kind of get to any place of acceptance. And I would probably distill it down into 3 sort of phases, or almost 3 themes that come to mind when I think about, how do I reconcile it? And the first has been that journey to accepting responsibility and self-acceptance. And for me, those 2 things have gone hand in hand. As I say, initially, you have this kind of, charged reaction of this is not me, this is not my character. But ultimately, those maneuvers around it, for want of a better word, I think are self-protective. And the sooner we can sit with it, and for me, that was really sitting with the reality of the facts that my behavior that night put another person's life at risk. And I think also the acknowledgement that the single luckiest, most gracious element of the whole thing was that it wasn't so much worse that he didn't die, basically. So I suppose the horror of what could have been really helped kind of, I suppose, in a real sense, kind of sit me down and also, create the space to have those challenging conversations with myself that I think in many ways I'd been avoiding for a really long time. And this event was almost a catalyst for trying to find some self-acceptance and self-love that was otherwise missing. And, you talk about the media and the Herald Sun. I think in a really sort of strange way, having a social chorus telling you that you're no good almost forced me to sort of dig into that and find the parts of myself that were good and sit with them and accept them and try and sort of integrate those 2 things. Yes, I did this horrible thing, but how am I going to live with it? What am I going to make of it? How am I going to grow? So that would be the first step, I suppose, is sitting with the discomfort of the negative emotions like shame and finding space to accept them, not shy away from them. And it was very tempting to do that, to shy away, to deny, to sort of abnegate responsibility. But once I was able to sit with those feelings, I think I was able to accept it and accept responsibility and try and move forward. I didn't do that alone. I think the second theme would be, surrounding yourself with people who love you and can help you on that process. I have an amazingly supportive family and a really tight-knit group of friends who, sat with me and held hands and cried and just tried to make sense of it all together. And then about 3 months before going to prison, I met my now partner, Becky, and on the second date told her, everything. And she's been on this journey with me ever since, and just the most kind of wonderful, supportive person. So having that real support has also helped with that first step of acceptance. And I think the third thing for me is a very real obligation to try and make it right. I guess it's an idea about reparation. What am I going to do to make it right? And so that's really where I suppose bringing it back to that sense of purpose. It's really about just doing good work that ultimately tries to make the world a better place for other people. Sorry, that was probably rambling, but that's the three things that I would.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's not really rambling. It's pretty articulate, and obviously you've thought a lot about it. I mean, what else would there have been to think about? I guess I have so many conflicting feelings. I suppose I think what you did so obviously awful and wrong. There's a real instinct to turn away from that, and I suppose to write you off as a person, like a bad guy. But I guess there's also this idea of, redemption, and I suppose most people could probably look at something or a number of things they've done in their life that they're not proud of and that they'd like to unpick and turn around and make good. I mean, what you did is much worse than most people would do. It's really very stark and very awful. But I guess, what is there to do but to go on and to try to make the best of it? And I mean, what does it mean to try to lead a good life? I mean, they're very big questions. I suppose, at least you've had the courage to look at them properly, and to try to, make something positive out of something so horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the choices are really limited in a way. You can either shy away from something and walk the other way and choose to step out of society perhaps, or, move to a different state, or go and find a job somewhere that will keep you out of the public eye. Or I think, what I've tried to do is, just, I suppose, accept it and try and walk with it. And that's not always easy. It's this massive part of my life that I don't think I've fully integrated by any means. But at the same time, I don't want to just pretend that it didn't happen or try and hide it somehow, or or walk away. I think the imperative for me was already there in terms of doing something positive with my life. I think I was kind of on this seeking adventure somewhere along the way. I got lost in that, and it led me down a pretty grim path. And in spite of that, I think I've just tried to come back to that, I suppose, sentiment. It's really solidified it in many ways now that I feel like there's no other choice really but just to try and make the best of it.
Well, let's talk about Why Farm. Tell us about the name and tell us about what you do.
Sure. Well, perhaps I've already alluded to it in that sense of searching for purpose. I think Why Farm is really my initially personal interrogation of that question. Why farm? Why farming? Why agroecological farming? And it's really about, for me, I think I found a clarity of purpose in agroecology, and I think I'm endlessly curious about what drives other people to agriculture, to cooking, to eating, to doing things differently. So it started really as an inquiry, which is probably evident in the name. And it's evolving. I think currently I'm raising some beef cattle on my parents' property on a beautiful slice of Tangerong country up in the northeast of Victoria, and documenting the process along the way. There's a lot of learning involved in trying to farm for real. I have an academic background and not necessarily the practical knowledge of how to string up an electric fence or how to move cattle in a small yard or how to market a beef product. So I really just wanted to document the journey and to talk about food and farming and agroecology in a way that is approachable to a wider audience. The widest possible audience is eaters. We all eat, if we're lucky, I guess 3 times a day, but some of us less and some of us more, but we all do it. And I think in the food systems world, we kind of guilty of getting caught up in the bubble, but I wanted to find a way to talk about everything that's involved in farming.
And what are some of the things that you have been talking about, or some of the conversations that you want to have around this?
I think initially it's that sense of wonder and the sense that you really don't know what you don't know. There's been so many learnings along the way, so many sort of little vignettes or snippets or stories that arise just in the everyday life of trying to do farming. So talking about those things. One thing that I'm really sort of fascinated by at the moment is just the simple joy of seeing nature do its work. We had this patch of thistles on our property in one paddock, and it was huge. It was this massive thicket, and the impulse is to go in there and what chemical do we need? How can we get rid of these thistles? This is not good. This is not what we want. And, after kind of searching around the internet, Facebook groups of Regen Ag, it's actually a really sort of common indicator about landscape and how it's working. So we just decided to do nothing and leave them, let them do their thing. And coming back this year, so a year later, come back and all the thistles have browned off and disappeared, and there's this amazing lush green grass pasture under where they were. So it's just telling the stories like that. For me, it was all kind of ephemeral in a way. I know that there are practices out there. I know that there are people out there doing these things, but what are the things? What are some of the examples? So that's a powerful one at the moment. Another one is, I suppose, the reality of raising an animal for slaughter. We'll be finishing our first steers later this year, and finding that I'm feeling quite confronted by that. And, as a lifelong sort of meat eater and enthusiast, the idea that, this creature that you've raised and cared for is going to be meat is not all that comfortable. So I'm really, interested in just documenting that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I suppose it's that, it's like it's honouring that life with a good life and a good death. And but yeah, they are really big questions, especially when those big brown eyes are looking looking straight into your soul.
Yeah, we're raising belted Galloways, which are particularly good-looking cattle. I mean, they're all good-looking, really, but those eyes are massive. And I've just been sitting in the paddock trying to, I suppose, get to know them, but it's challenging. Not ready.
I mean, what do you think you're going to do about that?
I think press on. I think, for us, cattle have been a really, I suppose, important landscape management tool. We're following holistic planned grazing and seeing great results in bringing our what was quite degraded soils back to some vibrancy of life. So, I think, and as I say, I'm quite passionate about meat as a food. So I think really pressing on and confronting those feelings and then making an assessment.
And, given your personal story, do you feel like, can farming save a person? Is that, is it it feels like a cliche, like back to the earth, back to what's real, the soil in your hands. But is there something in that?
There are all these cliches and they all ring true. So I have found it a really generative and healing experience, just being outside, feeling that connection to nature. Also the natural rhythms of work with lots of times to think and reflect, maybe sometimes too much time. But the power of being outside and learning a place and learning the plant names, learning the bird calls, watching the change of seasons. For me, I never thought I'd be excited about a wattle bloom, but evidently I am really excited about the acacia that's about to come out on our place and this explosion of colour that happens each year. So I've found it to be incredibly powerful and healing. But I think in the same breath, I think it's also crucial to acknowledge the incredible privilege that comes with that opportunity. How many people have access to that kind of experience in nature? So I think there's also a mandate that comes with that personal experience, which is to ask, how can I create opportunities for other people, and in particular First Nations people, to have a rewarding, healing and generative experience on the land and on country?
It's probably important to say that you do have a really privileged background, like a legal family, and obviously you mentioned your parents have got this land that is really privileged. What do you do with that? How do you reconcile that? Even the fact that your family stuck by you and supported you. I cannot imagine that it's you and your brother involved in this terrible incident. That's obviously they live with that every day.
Yeah, of course. And it's been a really challenging experience for I suppose for all of us individually, but equally as a family. But there's also been a powerful, I suppose, connectivity that's come with the experience. You almost get forged together by, you're confronted by this external it wasn't external, it was entirely internal, but then it becomes external in the sort of public eye. So yeah, I think we really kind of forged together in through that experience. In terms of reconciling the privilege, I mean, it's that's really the question, isn't it? It's for me, it's like, what are we going to do? How are we going to open this place up to others so that they can share in these experiences on this place? And again, in my work in the food system, it's about how can we create access not just to land and experiences in nature, but to good and healthy food. I mean, that's just a massive challenge that we're all confronted with right now, but something that I'm pretty passionate about and engaged with. So again, I mean, it's a tricky one. Kind of step back and say, like, this is ludicrous. And I think every, I suppose, landholder in that country is confronted with that reality of the history of this country. And what does it mean to own land as with the colonial legacy that we have? So, and these are questions that we're constantly navigating, and now it's time to take action. It's sort of now it's time to start building relationships with traditional owners and having meaningful cultural exchange and growing enough food that we can donate some of it,
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I suppose, it has to be done. Like, the inequalities at all levels of society, and certainly in the food systems, are something that I guess we're all implicated in. It's. I mean, have you made any overtures? Are you beginning those relationships?
Yeah, we've just started to reach out to different groups, and really hopeful that, and I'm, also conscious that it will be it's a long-term process over a long period of time. But, as a family, we're really committed to that process. And as an individual, I'm also really committed to having these hard conversations. So, I mean, I think, as eaters or as a society, this is what we're confronted with at the moment, is this challenge of managing our common resources, our environment. And I think in order to do that and to get serious about building a community that's founded on mutual aid, we need to get serious about distributing those resources better. So I suppose for me, I'm very conscious that in regenerative agriculture, it seems like there's a lot of white men raising cattle, and here I am as a white man raising cattle. So, I think it's about more than that, and it has to be about more than that. So I think, that's the kind of challenge that we're confronted with as landholders and farmers, but also as eaters and participants in this economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to, when you're in Central America with your sort of academic approach to saving the world, and obviously, so much has happened since then. Like, how do you sort of look back on those, the past years and where you've got to?
Well, that time overseas was really formative, and as much as I think I sort of, on a personal level, wasn't in a particularly good place, I was also learning a lot, and there are experiences that I can kind of bring to my work today. In Guatemala, our work was about working with coffee farming families and decision making, and the same principles apply to the work that I'm currently doing with Melbourne farmers markets. We work with lots of small producers, and they're faced with very similar challenges, albeit on a completely different scale to small producers in Central America. So sort of general rules tend to apply across the board. Everyone's struggling with the impacts of climate change. Everyone's struggling with market impacts. Everyone's struggling with supply chain issues. So I think there is a kind of universality to the challenges that we confront in the food system. So, I mean, I'm very grateful for those experiences and for having, perhaps the approach is different now, but the ends is the same.
And Dom, looking forward, like what are your hopes and dreams for yourself and for the farm?
For the farm, the initial hope is to build some soil life. We came onto the property and it had, in sort of very typical fashion, been grazed very heavily and neglected for a long period of time and sprayed intensively with all sorts of chemicals. So it's really about bringing some function back to the ecology. And most of that is just about sitting back and doing not much. We're obviously rotating our cattle across the property and applying a few sort of biological stimulants at different times. But other than that, it's really letting nature do its work. So just excited to see that process in motion. And then, of course, raising some good quality beef. I mean, that's not easy. Finishing cattle on grass is a challenge, and we are rookies. So that's going to be a steep learning curve. But I suppose I'm just excited about the learning that is involved in doing something like that, and also hopeful that on a personal level I can document that and then share it. I'm really sort of inspired by the idea of transparency in this space, and feel like there's enough space for other people, like people who want to get involved to do so. So that's another thing that I'm really excited for our property, is to also see what other enterprises could fit if there was a young person, or don't have to be young, but that wanted to come along and say raise some meat chickens or do some eggs. There's definitely space and opportunity for that. So I think it's about creating an environment of opportunity and collaboration.
And what about for yourself? Like, I mean, I feel like if I met you, like, would I be scared of you? Would I be scared of this thing that was in you, or is it something that's in all of us? Like, I don't know. Like, what about your personal hopes for yourself and for your future?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure if that question's really for me to answer, but I think if you met me, even with the knowledge of what I've done and what happened, I'm hopeful that, you'd be able to find a way for it to fit with the rest of me. I think, as humans, we're all fallible, and I'm not going to say that everyone has it in them, but we all are capable of making mistakes. And, as I said, it's really about how you live with it and how you move on. So I'm hopeful that if you met me, we'd be able to have a good yarn and share some good food, and it would all sort of fade into insignificance. I know that that's not going to be the experience for everyone, but I'm not quite sure how it will evolve over the years. I mean, on a personal level, as I say, there's kind of been this journey towards reconciling it. But now it's also just about, I suppose, building my life, my personal life, and living it. I mean, my partner and I are thinking about having kids in a couple of years. So it's also, I'm very conscious of how do I not only learn to make a living off the land, but also kind of get to a place where I would be confident to be a father. So, I mean, I suppose that's where I'm at in this journey.
Well, thanks, Dom. Thanks for talking with us today. Is there anything that you haven't said that you think is important to say? Anything else you'd like to get out there?
I mean, I just think it's important in the alternative, regenerative, agroecological farming space that we find ways to work together. We're an incredibly small niche in a very big agricultural landscape. And I think in order for us to manage a significant amount of land in the way that, we know is good for the environment and good for people, that we need to do it together. So how can we meaningfully collaborate? So if anyone has ideas about that, or would like to reach out, or is interested in doing some farming, I encourage them to get in touch.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dom. I'm really glad that we had this chat.
Thanks, Dani, and thanks for creating the space and giving me the opportunity to talk. I understand that many people would probably turn away, and you didn't. So thank you.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This